Hi everybody, how's it going? This video is going to be a short overview of one of my absolute favorite authors, Junot Diaz, and his short story, Drown. So let's get started. I wanted to talk with you just very briefly about Diaz's biography, because in a lot of ways his fiction is very, very, very much informed by the life that he has lived. He was born in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic in 1968 and spent the first 6 years of his life there before he moved to Parlin, New Jersey in 1975. So he was 6 years old. He is the author of 2 short story collections, 1 novel, and 1 children's book. He's the author of Drown, which is a short story collection, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which is probably my favorite book ever, which is his first novel and so far his only novel, and his follow-up collection of short stories, This Is How You Lose Her. He's also the author of a children's book called Island Born. I unfortunately don't have a copy of that. Otherwise, I would show it to you. In 2008, he won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction when with his novel, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Again, just to reiterate, he really draws very heavily on a lot of his personal experiences, and the character who narrates Drown, the short story that we're talking about right now, as well as most of the stories in the collection Drown, as well as most of the short stories in This Is How You Lose Her, and as well as the narrator of the vast majority of The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, a man named Junior, is in a lot of ways kind of a stand-in for him. So I broke this down into kind of 2 major themes, one being the immigrant experience. And I have just a set of questions kind of for you to think about as you go about reading Drown and as you're thinking about maybe writing about it. So the first question here is, how does Diaz deal with the connections between race, socioeconomic status, and the immigrant experience? Because in so many ways, these things are very interconnected. It's easy to say that Drown is a story about class. Well, it's about class as it relates to race, as it relates to being a Dominican American. So what does Diaz seem to be saying about the way that these things work together? Similarly, how do the very few white characters in Drown treat the non-white characters? For instance, how does the army recruiter speak with and handle Junior? How do the teachers in the high school speak to the students? These are great questions to be asking. And also, what does Diaz's frequent use of untranslated Spanish tell us about how he views the immigrant experience? He often uses, he doesn't italicize any of the Spanish language. He doesn't set it apart. He doesn't translate it. And in a lot of ways, the slang that he uses is not, sort of general, whatever general Spanish slang means. It's very particular to the Dominican Republic and to Dominican Americans. So what does the fact that he uses this and he doesn't give us any kind of key or guidance to it? What does that tell us about how he views the immigrant experience? And then the last question that I want to follow up with here, or to finish out with here, is, are any of these observations generally applicable, or are they, like Diaz has suggested in the past, specific only to this really small subset of society? What can we learn about immigrant communities from reading Drown? Can we apply any of this generally, or are we only really reading about the experiences of this one group of people in this one community in New Jersey? So the next major theme, and probably even more important than the immigrant experience, is the theme of masculinity, machismo, and homosexuality. Diaz has said that, people want to talk about the way that he writes about race, the way that he writes about the immigrant experience, but very few people have talked about what is really at the heart of not just Drown, but all 3 of these books. It's his sort of central project. It's the thing that he focuses on. So, what does Diaz seem to be suggesting about the role of sexuality and sexual orientation in friendship? And this can be thinking about the way that sexuality shapes Junior's relationship with his friend Beto, or the way that Junior behaves when he's around his straight friends. So this can be, what does the role of homophobia play? These are all really great questions to be asking. What does the story seem to suggest about the nature of heterosexual relationships? And there are a few mentions of sexual, like heterosexuality, but one of the biggest dynamics here is the relationship between Junior and his mother. Sort of, what's the dynamic between men and women, masculine and feminine, in this world. What does Diaz seem to be suggesting in the story about the fluidity of sexual orientation? Junior worries that, after his two encounters with Beto, that he may be gay, and he's frightened by this. He writes Beto off because Beto is gay, and he's very curious about these things. He's very frightened by these things. And to follow up with Junior's encounters with Beto, are they examples of sexual assault? Because Beto sure doesn't seem to ask Junior. And what does Diaz seem to be saying about consent here? And then again, to really tie all of this together, how are the answers to all of these questions also coded into the experience of being a Dominican American man? Because in so many ways, the ways in which Junior is behaving and the ways in which other men in his community are behaving are not just because they are straight or because they're men, but because they are specifically immigrant men and Dominican American men. How are these things connected? Because none of these things are operating within a vacuum. So these are just some questions for you to be thinking. These are some of the major issues that Diaz is dealing with in his story, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.